Hi everyone, I am back for another review, and I will be reviewing License to Kill. It's the last Timothy Dalton James Bond movie. It came out in 1989, and it stars Timothy Dalton as James Bond, Carey, Lowell, Pam Bouvier, the Bond girl, Desmond, Llewelyn, the usual Q at the time, and also the usual other characters. But I will also explain the character of the villains as well. Robert Davi plays a Pablo Escobar type villain. This movie is centered around the South American drug wars, where Pablo Escobar is essentially portrayed by Robert Davi. Not actually Pablo Escobar, but it was a different character, but it was inspired by Pablo Escobar. The movie is about James Bond going rogue, avenging the death of Felix Leiter's wife. Felix Leiter is a CIA agent who Bond is usually teamed up with, and his wife is murdered, and Felix Leiter is grievously wounded after their wedding. And the whole movie is James Bond essentially avenging Mrs. Leiter's death, and also at the same time trying to help his friend Felix Leiter find justice. But as usual, Bond is not allowed to go rogue by the British Secret Service. He is ordered back to London to go to another assignment. 007 resigns effectively, where they have a meeting, not in the usual office in London, but in another location, which is, spoiler alert, I don't want to say it, Florida. And it's about James Bond says, no, I'm going to bring these people to justice, and he runs away from them. But also at the same time, Q, his gadget master, follows him wherever he goes. And Pam Bouvier, the Bond girl played by Carey Lowell, is a CIA operative, ex-CIA operative, who helped Bond on his mission as well. So the movie features Isthmus City, which is basically Mexico. The movie was shot in Mexico, actually, because it wasn't shot much in London, England at all. It was actually shot in Florida and in Mexico. This was the late 80s. It came out in 1989. So this movie had to compete with Lethal Weapon 2, the Die Hards, and movies like that. And the movie did okay, but it didn't knock the lights out like a lot of Bond movies do in terms of box office. And I think from then on, Bond producers in future movies have used a later date, not the summer, to release the Bond movies. And we will see where the new James Bond is. But the movie is essentially like ahead of its time. Timothy Dalton plays Bond like how Daniel Craig does, but also at the same time, Timothy Dalton was not appreciated for that movie like he is now. He was way ahead of his time when it came to that. But what I've seen is that this movie has gotten respect over time, and it's one of my favorite Bond movies. And what I've learned is that sometimes you just got to give things time. What I have also seen is that Benicio del Toro plays Dario, who's like Robert Davi's henchman in the movie, and also quite brutal. It involves a drug war, so I'm sure for those of you that haven't seen the movie can only imagine the kind of brutality that was in the movie. And Wayne Newton is in the movie. He plays like a corrupt preacher, and this kind of plays on the headlines in the late 1980s, where a lot of preachers, Christian preachers on TV, were kind of in the news for all the wrong reasons. Jim Baker was arrested. Jimmy Swaggart was caught with a prostitute. So Wayne Newton kind of plays a character revolved around them. And it kind of plays a little bit on the late 1980s with greed and whatnot. There's like a Wall Street kind of character who's also one of the villains. He's Robert Davi's accountant, who's a little villainous, and it plays on the Wall Street scandals in the 1980s. So I felt that this movie essentially captures the end of the 80s all in all. I wish there was a lot more effort put into this movie, and the writer's strike definitely messed it up. But I feel that the movie is a good movie, and it has aged like fine wine over time. The only thing is, obviously, I wish Timothy Dalton played more Bonds, but you know, that's studio politics, and that's a whole other discussion. But I find that License to Kill was a great movie. It's actually one of the early, if you want to say, Daniel Craig-like Bond movies. And it's a lot about going rogue, and what Daniel Craig is later appreciated for, Timothy Dalton started, and he should have been appreciated at the time, and he wasn't. But audiences were different back then. They just came off the Roger Moore James Bonds, which were kind of comical and whatnot, and the Sean Connery James Bonds, which was a little earlier, time has been removed since. So I feel like people were used to the Roger Moore clownish, comical James Bonds, and they weren't ready for Timothy Dalton. But now, obviously, Daniel Craig kind of changed the whole paradigm with that. And we'll see where they go with the James Bond franchise in the near future, Amazon and whatnot. So we shall see what happens. And it's definitely a great movie to watch. It's 1989, and it's License to Kill. I'll see you at the next review.